Hello, everyone. Welcome to Today with Totally Out Now. I'm Raga Olga D'silva, or Totally Out Now, as you know me. Today, as the name suggests, brings to you stories, narratives that are trending today. At Today, we bring guests who share their lived experiences or ideas that are topical and pave the way to change the old narratives. Today, we have one such guest: feminism, feminist. Such a simple word, right? But it has such strong associations. I recently read what Tabu, a Bollywood actor, said. She said, I don't want to be called a feminist, but I don't disown feminism. Our actions are more important than these labels. Somehow, I don't know, we have begun to believe that being a feminist is being anti men. Then, recently, the word patriarchy started trending in India. Furthermore, there is a new awakened woke people who put labels to everything and decide what is right or wrong, including the past that some of us grew up on. This has also brought about the so called cancel culture, where people are called out and literally someone cancelled from mainstream culture. For instance, you may have heard about Enid Blyton controversy, a British author of numerous bestsellers, including The Secret Seven, The Famous Five, The Faraway Tree, my favorite, absolute all time favorite. But to the late writer's critics, her books are elitist, sexist, racist, homophobic, xenophobic, and a lack of literary merit. In all this noise around us, what does all this mean? Who better to speak to than Dr. Sonora Jha, who recently published a book, How to Raise a Feminist Son? Oh my God, I read that book and I'm absolutely a huge fan. Sonora Jha is an essayist, novelist, researcher, and a professor of journalism at Seattle University. She grew up in Mumbai, where I grew up as well. And she has been the chief of Metropolitan Bureau for the Times of India and contributing editor for East magazine in Singapore. Now, there are many, many things I can say about Sonora, but let's get her on board. Sonora, welcome to Today with Totally Out Now.
Thank you, Raga. It's so wonderful to speak to you, and as a fellow Mumbaikar, and so many thoughts of ours sort of connect. So yeah, lovely to be here.
So wonderful. And, congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
I have ordered a proper copy, right? A hard copy, because I still have problems reading online. But hey, that book really talked to me. I'm sure it talked to so many others. So
Thank you.
I'm going to start with what made you write on the subject? It's such a, like, I don't know, there are so many different connotations to the word feminist.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to someone today earlier this morning, and I was saying that, in raising a feminist son, I may have used the word feminism or feminist just about 3 times in the entire all the years, because it's really a practice. It's a value system. It's a way of looking at the world and a way of living your life. And yes, of course, it's been so loaded and so misconstrued, but really, it's I think Gloria Steinem had the best definition, where it's the radical idea that women are people too. And if you really start to expand on that and you see how we haven't got a complete love for women and respect for women in all their humanity, so I think it's really important as a label to call it out, and that's why I own that label. I love that label, and my son holds that label up as pride, as a matter of pride as well. The only thing is that these days sometimes it's become a performative thing. So my son doesn't like to say, "Oh, I'm a feminist," because he feels like it's just become like a cool thing to say with a lot of cool kids. And he says a lot of young men are calling themselves feminists now because they think it's a cool thing, but not really living a feminist life, which is connected in so many ways with anti-racism, with socialism, with so many other things. So to see that those intersections, and live by those values is really important. And most of us are feminists, we don't even know it.
Yeah, exactly. And, but why do we, like someone like a Tabu, right? The actor, why does she not want to own it? And most of her interviews, you see her disowning it basically, and then trying to own it in a different way.
Yeah, I don't know what she's thinking, but I think there's so many people who reject it because of the way it's been misunderstood, right? That it feels like some sort of a label that, oh, you're a man hating woman and that you've rejected everything about men. No, I'm a man loving woman. I love my son. I love a lot of the men in my life. And even the men that I've left or, walked away from, there were so many things about them that I loved, but I could see that they were trapped in this notion of masculinity, or the sense of what separating themselves from women or feminine ways of being, etc. And that ended up being sad for them, and and it ended up being emotionally immature. And so I think there's power in owning that label and saying, look, with this label, I understand that we are not all there yet, that we need feminism because it tells us that we have to still fight, we're still in the struggle for equality of women, for equity, and that no, we aren't there yet, where women can be leaders and not be faced with even more blocks than men. And that's just the easiest thing, and that's the most obvious or more middle class urban phenomenon. But the fact that women are being raped and are not able to talk about it, that they're sexually abused and are not able to talk about it, that men are not being taught not to rape, but girls are being constantly told how not to get raped. All those things, unless we recognize that this is a struggle and we need to commit time, money, efforts to fighting for this, we're not going to win. We're not going to get those things that are basic, things for humanity. So that's why I use the word feminism, and that's why I own the label feminist and ask my son to own it, because it calls out something and it says, we're not there yet. This is where I stand, and this is what I'm going to fight for.
It is interesting, because my own journey, I get invited as a guest on shows, and not very long ago, I must say, someone asked me, are you a feminist? I mean, it's obvious I am, right? But, I hesitated to respond to it positively, because I just thought to myself, I am so-called lesbian. I call myself, I'm from the LGBT community. If I say I'm a feminist, they're going to think I'm a man basher, whereas that is not. I love men. But instantly your mind starts churning out all these notions, because that's what it's called, internal homophobia, for people like me who didn't accept my sexuality. So I wonder what we call people like that, like me, when I wasn't accepting my feminism either.
Yeah.
So I watched a very interesting TEDx video recently about this woman who said that, why are we calling this term labeling feminism or feminist? We should be calling it equalism.
Mm-mm.
And I'm saying, okay, okay, you can have so many multiple layers and labels, right? But I'll come back to this book. What, what was amazing for me, that how you extracted some parts of Mumbai into it, your own childhood, your own growing up days, and beautifully narrated some of the instances. And I'm going to bring that up. And for instance, your relationship with your father. Are you able to share that with us?
Yeah, sure. One of the things, it's a scary thing to write memoir, right? And to write about your own personal life, especially in the South Asian and the Indian context, because we're not supposed to talk about these things. We don't, hamare ghar mein to sab kuch acha hai. I hope I can speak a little bit of Hindi.
Yes,
Like,
please, please.
all is well in our homes. We are winning. We are great, and there's no weakness. And I understand where that comes from. There's a sense of vulnerability. But I think where I am in my life right now, if I don't do it, who will? And so there's some amount of whistleblowing and saying, look, this is happening in our cultures, and I can stand up and say, this happened with me in my family, right? That there was violence. My father was a violent man. He was in the army, and he was violent toward my mother, and he was violent toward his children. He was physically violent. And my brother learned that violence from him and sort of turned it on us. And it wasn't just like, oh, little kids fighting. It was like brutal violence, and is still a violent man. And I am estranged from my brother because I haven't heard an apology, and I haven't heard a turning around of that. So I will definitely blow the whistle on that and say, can we please start talking to our men about these things? Can we please stop enabling them, where we're laughing at their ridiculous jokes and their sexist jokes, and we're encouraging all these men in our world and in our leadership that are making sexist remarks, and we just keep quiet and say, men will be men, or he's old, let him be, etc. I think they're capable of change. So my father now, he's a work in progress. He's almost 80 years old, but there's a recognition on his part of his violence and of his failings, and he speaks of that, and he says, my violence was my failing. I lost so many of my family, and my son is estranged from me. My daughters keep their distance from me, and I should not have done that. I've ended up lonely because of that. He's remarried, but he's very careful. He's not violent now. But he will still occasionally fall into this thing of mocking women, of saying something about fat people, or making just these horrible remarks. And in those moments I'll say, I'm not having it. I'm not, goodbye, I'm gonna hang up now, and I walk away. So, and I think unless we call out these things, right, unless we call out and say, look, this is wrong, we'll keep repeating the cycle. Why do we think that our girls will be happier if we are not calling out the men in our lives? Why do we think our boys will be happier? So coming to the thing of raising a feminist son, I don't think that my boy will have a good life if he grows up feeling like he has to be macho, or that he has to be the protector and the provider and constantly be winning, always be right, never have to apologize, never have to see himself as vulnerable. I don't think he's going to be happy. And what I want is happiness for my boy. What I want is happiness for men. So yeah, I mean, feminism is loving men.
Yeah, I guess, and then them loving themselves as well, isn't it? Because somehow it is made out that it's a woman's job to fix a man, or fix anything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that gets to me as well. You're just making me think about Mumbai. If you were in Mumbai raising your son in Mumbai, you are not in Mumbai. You are in the US. So I'm assuming that he was very little when you went away, right? To Singapore first and then to the US. Would it have been possible for you to raise a feminist son in the Mumbai that we understand, in the India that we understand?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have been possible, and I think in some ways maybe it might even have better. Like sometimes I do think about these things, and I ruminate on that in my book as well, because some of the best feminists I know are in India, and it was a formative time that the formative years of my feminism were in India, from Indian feminists, and I feel like in a way my son missed out on that kind of feminism, and but I try to bring that in now for him. The reason it was important for me to raise him outside it is, one, there weren't too many good examples of gentle masculinity around, especially when I was a young mother, and I would have had to raise him within my family where there were violent men. I do think that in the culture there, in the films there, in the way boys are, become Raja Beta, and become sort of like these little princess with their own little kingdoms given to them by their grandmothers, or their grandparents. The privileges that he would have had, and especially I come from a Brahmin family, and even his father is not a Brahmin, but I think he would have benefited from those kinds of privileges. And within those privileges, you become sort of blind to other people's otherness, right? Like their othering. And I don't think I would have wanted that. To me, it became very important to raise us to be in a culture where we were somewhat marginalized, we were somewhat foreign, we were somewhat on the fringes, because I think there's so much power in being on the fringes. There's so much solidarity that you feel. The jokes are better on the fringes. The songs are better. It's just so much more fun, and it's so much more, it steeps you in the struggle and gets you to be in solidarity with other people who are in the struggle.
You referred to that you're a Brahmin.
Yeah.
So I've also read in your book about being the Brahmanical patriarchy. Can you explain to us what that really means, to an audience that doesn't understand India that much?
Right. So the Brahmanical patriarchy is really, and the Brahmins are the upper caste and the highest caste in the caste system, right? And Brahmins have traditionally been sort of the priests and the providers of, or the holders of knowledge, and seen as lighter skinned, blah blah blah, all kinds of things that are associated with that. it gives you a certain privilege. It gives you a certain cachet in the world. It gave me a sense of, I often tell my friends here that in the US that I grew up like a white woman in India, because it gave me a sense of entitlement, even though it was I wasn't running around saying, oh, I'm a Brahmin, give me this, but it's this sort of like unconscious sense of swagger in the world, and knowing that things will open up for you. We were talking about my last name just before this. In India, it's identifiable as a Brahmin last name, etc. So I think all those privileges that, say, middle class or upper class white people have in the US are things that I had there. So that kind of patriarchy can also be very abusive. So we know of Brahmin men raping Dalit women or lower caste women, and thinking that this is sleeping with them is sort of like cleansing them somehow, cleansing women. We've heard things like that, and that these people have to be kept in their place, and this is one way to do that. So it's a violent kind of patriarchy. It's and it rains down on their own women as well. So for me to call it out is like, yeah, I was also suffering under Brahmin patriarchy, and if I don't call it out, then I'm just going to enable it sort of raining down on others as well. And so we're not benefiting from being adjacent or being close to Brahminical patriarchy. Yes, we are benefiting in many ways, but ultimately that kind of violent patriarchy can also be turned upon me. So where's the victory in that? So we have to call it out, call out the ways we've been entitled, call out the ways in which we've been privileged, and then walk away from it, and also call out the ways in which we've been disadvantaged under it.
So when you were going through this phase in your life, where you had an abusive dad and you were going through your stuff in your growing up years, was there someone you could fall back on? Was that you also worked at some point? Were you able to use your journalism, for instance, to share these narratives?
Yes, in my childhood, no, I can't think of anyone that I could fall back on. And, it was, I think I was just so lonely. And I was definitely, there were great moments of happiness, but I think I thought that the world was just going to be this way. I thought that I would never really be able to express myself, that I'd always be somewhat of a failure, like that, I wasn't doing well academically, never thought that I would do a PhD. And I also had polio, so I limped. And I was teased. And so this is another huge reason why I didn't want to go back to India, because I was actually teased in the streets. I was taunted in the streets. And this is some, horrific thing that we allow in India. I have never been taunted like that in the US. And that's, it was shocking for me that the sense of like absence of a certain kind of violence of a gaze, right, was there. And so I think that kind of loneliness also helped me identify with other people that were being othered, right? So when I went to in my post graduation, I went to the social communications media program in Mumbai, where I met their head of department, Jaru Mullah, and I credit her with my feminist awakening, and the sense of like, oh, finally I am somewhere that I belong. I love that the cat is
He always makes a cameo. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I love it.
Biscuit is also from Bombay. Name is Biscuit. He's from Bombay. He's from near Times of India. We pulled him out of the rubbish bin from the near Times of India. So he's our friend.
I think he's agreeing. I think, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So yeah, I think when I became, then I got drawn to journalism because of like, I wanted to tell some of these stories, but there were always other people's stories, right? I wasn't going to tell my own. I had no plans of telling my own story at the time, but it was, I was drawn to it because I wanted to explore some of these things, injustices in society. And yeah.
What is fascinating me is that, in India, in Mumbai, it's cosmopolitan. We live communally, right? Even if we don't live in small houses, but we live in apartments, and it's communal, and everybody knows everybody's lives, basically. And, the young child, being abused, and nobody really helps in Mumbai, and which is the saddest part, because I mean, I've come from a background like this. My father was an alcoholic, and I sadly say that I'm glad that he passed away when I was 6, because I don't know how my mother's life would have turned out, or other sub siblings would have turned out. But the sad part is that people just watch,
Yeah.
and the most formative years of your life, when you have to deal with this, like you said, academically you suffered, and then you go into a workplace, you're just not able to speak about this. So I'm just wondering, at what point does the change happen within you and you say, this is enough, I can't take it anymore? Do you have to wait till you're in your 40s, or later years, or can you stop it at any point?
Oh, this is a great question. So I wish for a very different life for younger women and girls growing up in India now, and I can see that as well, right? This is so important because I know that I was dying for self-expression, right? I was drawn to stories, I was drawn to saying something about the world, but I didn't know what that was and how I would do that, right? So we're talking, you're mentioning, like, people will not come and see, help out a child. It has to start with women, right? It has to start with helping out women, because people knew that my father was beating my mother, right? And there was a time when my brother and I called the cops, and the cops came and they said, uh, in Marathi, "Navra bivicha lafda hai," means like it's just a husband and wife fight, and they left. And then we had to deal with the fact that my father's rage at having us having called the cops, and we were shocked because we thought the cops would help and would at least warn our father and say, you do this again. And today they may do that, but back then, no. And so there was a sense of like, oh, it's their private matter. Yes, we know that she's being beaten, but and my mother would also hide her wounds and say, oh, this, I just not walked into a door, some whatever excuse. And I knew all this stuff was wrong. It was feeling so wrong, but because it was being accepted by society, I didn't know what to do. I felt like this is how it is, right? This is fate. What was the escape at that time? Marriage. Right. So I was like, oh, I'm going to marry a really gentle man, and then this is how I will escape from it. And of course, as a journalist, I get to write about these things, etc. And so, instead of giving our girls all these different alternatives of how to explore who you want to be, right? So I'm married off at 23. I wanted to. I was dying to get married so I could escape this situation. And I'm a total romantic. I stay a total romantic even today. So that's what I thought was the escape. And then realizing that no, there are other things that I want to do and other ways in which I want to live. And you could not have told me at that age, at 23 or 22, when I was getting ready to get married, that, girl, you're going to be divorced twice. And not only do you have polio, but you're going to be in this terrible car accident in which you'll lose your left ankle. You're going to raise your child single-handedly, and et cetera, et cetera. I would have slit my wrist or something. I would have thought, this sounds like hell to me, right? I'm really going to be washed up and lonely and broken. But you could not have told me how much happiness I was going to have in my life, even through all these things, because I live an independent and self-expressed life, because I'm dating now, like I'm enjoying every aspect of life, and I really feel very happy. And I don't know how to express, and I want to, like, scream this back to young girls in India, saying, don't be afraid, you're not going to be ostracized. All my friends are still with me. All the people respect me. There's good things that have come into my life, and of course you have to work then for all those things, right? But that's possible.
It's so good to hear that it's possible, right? Because the words that I see, even the younger girls, because I'm on some hundreds of groups, and where young women are part of the group, and they talk about things, and I think, my God, hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in the last 25, 30 years. I mean, at least in our times, we didn't have exposure. We didn't have Google. We didn't have other people's lived experiences that they shared, like you're sharing or I share, right? You have access to that. And then why should you feel the shame, the guilt, that you're selfish, all those labels and burdens that are put on us as women, right? From a very young age. Now, how do you change that, Sonora? That attitude?
you do it with examples, right? So one of the reasons I wrote this book, and I'm hearing from young women in India who are saying, like, I have no plans to be married or to have kids, but I still found so much in your book, because it gives me a sense of hope, like, oh my goodness, I can also do this. And I feel like we want more and more examples like that girls to know, like, no, you do your thing, and you're not going to be ostracized, you're not going to end up alone. And sure, maybe some people in your family will disown you or walk away from you. Well, were they yours to begin with, or was it all conditional? And it is okay, like, you will land on your feet and it'll be fine. That you're not going to be exploited by this world, or all of that. That the world has changed and you can keep walking toward that change. So I think it'll come from having more women speak up, tell their stories, get out and say, like, it's fine, like, come, make the jump, take that leap. It's a leap of faith, take that leap you know
You're a wonderful example of that, and I think I made an example of my life much later in life. I couldn't take the leap of faith.
Mhm.
I tell the young women, find your place in life, make sure that you're financially independent. That's the most important thing, right? But however, I
Yeah.
was financially independent, but I was emotionally not independent. So it is so important for us to somehow through this navigate our way through and find a balance, right?
Yeah.
And then to bring up a son in an environment where the attitudes haven't changed, and then you have your way of thinking, you freed yourself, right? You've escaped from that patriarchy.
Yeah.
How do you bring a feminist son up in this environment? How do
In
you raise one? Yeah, in an environment like this, how do you raise a feminist son?
Yeah, well, you start by calling out people around you, right? You start by, and not calling out and saying, of course, in extreme circumstances like violence and everything, you really have to walk away. But it takes time. I understand. I'm not saying that women who stay in bad marriages are fools or anything, but it takes time. Like, society has to work with you, and that is why I'm saying feminism, because unless you call it out and you say, like, no, this is an issue, women are not there yet, you've not let women be there yet. You can't do a generalized, like, oh, I'm just going to be a humanist, or I'm going to be an equalist, or whatever it is, right? So the way you raise it is, like, you have to have, I never think of, like, oh, I never got up in the morning and said, come son, today's feminist lesson will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It was always like a value system that I was living a more feminist life. So I think where women, men, everyone of all genders are concerned, just start living a more feminist life. Embrace the joys and the freedoms that you are allowed under feminism, or that you're encouraged to have under feminism. Just start kind of living by that value system, and saying, I'm going to let my boy be gentle. I'm going to let him cry. I'm not going to tell him boys don't cry. I'm not going to tell him go hit that bully back. I'm going to say, no, that's a bully. Let's talk about it, and let's make sure you don't end up like him, because look how much we are disliking him right now. And also say that that girls are taught to be demure. Girls are being told to be a little more sexy at a certain age, and yet be like innocent. All these pressures are out on girls. What are the pressures on you? Let's make sure that you are not being a rapist, that you are not, it's great to be attracted to women. Of course you're going to be attracted, of course you're going to be turned on, but it's much more fun to have consent. It's much more fun if she's also having fun. So all these things, learn to read the cues from women. So this whole arc of boyhood, you can bring a feminist value system to it, a feminist lens, feminist language for it, and you can have a lot of fun, like I was doing with my son, watching movies, and bringing little feminist conversations here and there. And he has learned that, and he watches movies with that lens now, right? So I think it brings just a loving attention, is what I say. Bring a feminist loving attention to everything in your life, and then things just become simple. Things become simpler. And of course, find your feminist village, which is what I say, like, find the other people who think like that, who are doing those kinds of things, who believe those. Make those kids your child's friends. Bring those values, and then of course, if you can't escape certain things in your family, recast them, right? So have these conversations with your boy, saying, I didn't like that thing that Nanaji said. I didn't like that thing that your acha said, or whatever culture you're from. It just made me feel bad, because if he's talking like that about women, he could be talking like that about me. And I feel like we shouldn't, but we'll forgive, and we'll sort of like not tune that out, or we'll say to him next time that we don't like those kinds of jokes. So recast and reframe, debrief with your kids after they've been through some horrific like situation.
No, this is very interesting. I think it's interesting for any parent to listening and to just understand. These are little tips. These are everyday things that we take for granted, right? I mean, I've raised twins, a son and a daughter. And I always wonder, after reading your book, in fact, I started reflecting, thinking, which lens was I wearing, when I was talking to them? Was it from, let me be fair to the male child, or let me be fair to the female,
Yeah.
you keep wondering what, when I think to myself that I think I've done all right, because equally both do laundry, like simple examples, like both do the dishes, both do the laundry, they will look after themselves equally. Like, I remember a few years ago, we had someone over, my mom was over, and I said to Ash, my son, to go and make some chai. She was shocked, she couldn't believe, she said, why is Ash making chai and not Anna? She
Mhm.
heard, and I had to correct her. I said, like, sorry. And even my son felt like, why shouldn't I be making chai, why should Anna be making chai? So I feel that we're all right, but it is interesting the lens we wear, right?
Yeah.
When we raise our children, it's so important.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it's so much
yeah,
so deeply rooted in us that often, I found myself having to, the biggest struggle was within myself, the biggest feminist enterprise was within myself,
I like that.
Yeah.
Feminist enterprise. It's, you have to unlearn so much we've learned, right? That's the biggest. Yeah, another thing about your book that really interested me. We come from a religious background, like in India, whether you look right or left, there's a temple, there's a church, there's a masjid, there's a gurudwara. All of us are religious. All of us go to, have faith. And then in that, you've written in your book about Sita, and you've written about Kali. And I'm thinking, in that kind of environment, shouldn't we have been feminist naturally? Shouldn't we have not this non-patriarchal upbringing naturally? So why did that happen, you
Yeah,
think?
I think because we made women devis, right? We made them goddesses, and then we made them worthy of worship, right? But we didn't humanize them. That we would much more easily think of women as goddesses than as human beings, with the rights of human beings, with all the emotions, the anger of human beings, and all of those things, right? The women are not allowed all those things, even though Kali is allowed to be angry and etc. But oh, Lord help you, if you're an angry woman, you will be cast aside, and you will be punished for that. So I think we didn't bring that down to human beings as well. A great movie by Satyajit Ray called Devi with Sharmila Tagore. I think that's a really good one to watch, where they think that she is a goddess, and all the pressures that are put on her because they think that she's a goddess, right? That you don't want to be a goddess. I don't want to be deified. Because then you make it. You're saying that I have to be goddess like in order to be loved, in order to be um, that I am worthy of worship in a certain context, and I need to also then be pure, and need to be above, then I'm worthy of protection, then I'm worthy of love and affection and all of that, right? And if I fall by the wayside, if I say no, this is not okay with me, and I walk away from this, or etc., then I become the slut, or I become like, oh, she deserved it, she was asking for it, right? Like, what, a Devi doesn't go out late at night and drink and get drunk. Of course she's going to be raped, right? So I think it's a double-edged sword that especially in India, we've perfected this way of making women devis but not allowing them to be human.
Gosh, it is really scary, isn't it? And I also feel that women are the worst. I mean, at least I have, seen that we are so misogynistic towards our own self, right? I've worked with corporate companies, and I will say, so, with a proposal, and they've said, "Oh, what will my boss say? This is too feminine. They will not accept it. No. They themselves come out with stuff that you feel like totally like, when is the world going to change? And this is where. So that brings me to my next question.
Yeah.
India, USA, right?
Yeah.
Both are misogynistic, both are
Mhm.
patriarchal in their own way.
Yeah.
How do you navigate? And do you see any changes? Things start changing, you believe?
Where, in India or in the
Both. I mean, you're between the two worlds right now.
Yeah, well, I do see some change, right? Like, I do feel that there are more single women in India, especially in urban India. And of course, there were so many. I feel like a lot of the domestic help that used to come to work for us were far more leading these independent lives, kicking their husbands out for being drunks and saying, "I'm going to raise my child on my own," without these social pressures and all these mores, the middle class mores that we had. And so I do think things are changing where we are having more women being single. We definitely have made so many strides with the LGBTQ rights and the visibility of those. Look at some of the television shows that I'm watching, and I feel like, wow, even the US is not doing shows like this, like Made in Heaven, where one of the central characters is a gay man, right? And we definitely see the sex and love and his struggles, etc. And and Four More Shots, Please, one of the four women is a lesbian woman, and there's a lot of solidarity for her. So I think all of this reflects, certain changes in society, certain shifts in. But the thing is, you have to find those, right? You have to find that circle. You have to move in those circles. You have to make sure that you're picking and choosing and being part of that. Then I see, when I look at all the rapes and still the conversations around those rapes, right? And the rise of Modi and the masculine swagger that he has, and the fact that he can say Didi Didi and, like, sort of tease this woman who's a senior politician and sort of do this very street side kind of mocking of her, and that people think that that's okay. Then I realize, well, there's a long way. We have a long way to go. Now, coming to the US, oh my God, the whole Trump era was so eye-opening. And of course, we knew, right, how much racism and misogyny there is. But to think that a man could be openly, he's been accused of rape. He's saying, we find out just a week or two before the elections that he is saying misogynist things like, oh, you can grab them by the pussy and things like that. And he still gets elected and is so worshipped by a huge class of people, I think is very eye-opening, right? And of course, there's insane amounts of racism, and so raising a brown-skinned boy in the US and watching the white gaze on my boy and on the slowly becoming, when he was young he's cute, and then he's suddenly become looking like a threat, and he's looking dangerous to white America. I had to come reckon with that and just kind of feel this sense of like, mothers, black mothers have felt this for the longest time. Native American mothers have felt this for the longest time. Latinx folks have felt this for the longest time. And here I am now. I have to be careful of this as well. It's definitely eye-opening, and then you realize, like, these struggles have to be interconnected, right? There's intersectionality. You have to realize, well, we are not all there yet. If a boy of color can be beaten up, while a white woman can, say that, oh, he did this to me, and, he can be beaten and murdered, etc. That if we struggle, that if we don't struggle for Black Lives Matter, we are not struggling for women either, right? That all these things have to be, because the issue is with white male or Brahminical male patriarchy. And as you said, patriarchy doesn't mean, oh, we're talking about men. We're talking about this whole system in which women are definitely included. In fact, I say sometimes we're the best foot soldiers of patriarchy, because we are doing the work for them. We're policing other women. We are telling other women, oh, you're, blah, 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 etc. So I think, yeah, to answer your question in this long roundabout way, it's definitely still a struggle. Some things are changing, but others are staying the same. But I have enough friends who enjoy the same kind of worldview, and that is expanding, sorry, there's ripple effects, and my son and his generation are finding all these the solidarity, right? They're definitely going to bring forward a much better world.
Wonderful. I mean, I see that, hope even in my children and their friends. They're 23, and what a beautiful world they are creating.
Yeah.
But having said that, it is a small world. I hope it expands, right?
Yeah.
That reminds me of an anecdote. Many years ago, I lived in New Zealand, and I remember, how children are invited to birthday parties. My twins were invited to a birthday party. They were about 5 years old. They were very little. So I went there to this house, Indian house, Punjabis, bling, total Punjabi family, 20, 30 women there. And the first thing they ask you is, okay, what does your husband do? you know. So I said, not, we separated, we're not together. So pehle to ya tauba all happened for the first 5 minutes. Then I remember three women said to me, and all together, Arey, who does his dishes now? Who does his washing and clothes? And I just turned around and said to them, excuse me? Is that, that is how women believe that they have been created to marry, to procreate, and then to become the housemaids, right? They were really upset, and I was very close to telling them, sorry, I don't have a husband, I have a woman in my life, and I think they would have all died. But this is what we do to each other, and they were really upset. I was basically nearly thrown out of that house with their stares, because I was not with the husband anymore, and that I was not looking after him. And I hope that attitude changes. And we're talking about Indian women who have obviously done well for themselves and have gone to another country.
Yeah.
So we carry this with us everywhere, right? And I hope we stop carrying that.
Yeah,
Because,
I mean, that speaks to another phenomenon, like that the fact that so much has changed in India. My sister just got married for a second time in her mid 40s, right? And is beautifully dressed, beautifully as a young, blushing bride, and it's such a joyous moment, and people, maybe there might be some people saying, oh, dekho kya ye hai wo hai and everything, and I feel like those people are not in our lives, and too bad for you, because we're having a lot of fun. And so I think you're absolutely right, that doesn't change. And the fact that here in the US, that we've frozen ourselves in time. We have remained stuck in this idea of what is India and what is Indian culture, and we're trying to teach our children these archaic notions of things like, oh, the bride's family pays for the wedding, etc. That's all bullshit. And so we've kind of brought that old India, what we thought were cultural or great Indian values, and we've maintained them here. And then while India has moved on, so
yeah, I agree. I mean, in the UK, we have a place in London, we have a place called South Hall.
Yeah.
When you go there, you're kind of stuck in time. You think you're in Amritsar 100 years ago. I mean, in fact, we have a Polish friend who is married for a long time to one of the Punjabi men, and she takes huge pride in saying that I know Punjabi really well. I wear this ghungat, cover my head in front of my mother-in-law every day. I do chai nashta. मैं उनके पैर पड़ती हूँ, and she takes pride. She's been brought up thinking that is how Indian wives are meant to be. And now she's been married for 40 years. For 40 years, she's been doing that. No life of her own. And that is what she believes. Now she's brought up children, and we can observe it, who are stuck in time. So and there's nothing wrong in going to temples and praying. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, but they're stuck in time. You see that they have forgotten that the India today is far, far, ahead of wherever else we live.
Right.
And that is the thing. So how do you navigate a social system that is stuck in the past? I think it is harder in the US and UK for us to bring up feminist sons than in India.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. And I know that my son was not comfortable in some of the, very traditional desi things. And and I was thinking, oh, I must take him for these events or these gatherings because he's Indian. I would make him wear this kurta pajama and say, come on, we should have some Indian connection. And he himself said that, those other kids, they ask me, where's your dad? Why isn't your dad here? I don't like that. And, none of them, their parents are not divorced, or they're living these very traditional, conservative, conventional lives, and he's feeling on the outside of that. And he says all they want to do is talk about the their old like traditions and things, and I don't enjoy it. And so I said, okay, we don't have to go there anymore. And he said, and by the way, that kurta was very stiff and would poke my body. So I said, okay, wear your t-shirts, not gonna do some fancy dress kind of thing, And so I definitely, and of course you wonder, right? You feel like, am I depriving him of Indian culture? Am I depriving him of this? Like, is he going to be, if I'm throwing him with white people and other people of other cultures, is he going to have an identity crisis, blah blah blah. I feel like those other kids are having an identity crisis because they've only been sort of cloistered in this fake idea of India and Indian culture. And my son started to read Tagore, and he started to get very curious about India and learned and read books and had, the interactions with other Indian people that where there was more than just being Indian that was in common. And so I think I feel like I took the best of values from India, and I took the best value system, the best as far as I'm concerned, right? And I raised my son with those values, and I walked away from things that were just felt like these were inhibiting our lives, right? That they were not built to empower us and for our joy, And for me, joy and the sense of like solidarity with other people, etc. These were things where I felt the most happy, and I felt like if I'm the most happy in this, my son is also going to be the happiest in that, and he has been, So
Wonderful. And it's a great foundation to give your child, right? And then, of course, they make their own choices later.
right,
But the foundation is positive, strong, magical, even, I think,
yeah,
because we didn't have that. You
yeah,
know, there is a lot of pressure. I'm going to talk about the LGBT community for a bit. There's a lot of pressure on gay couples, right? Like I've two women, my partner and I, two women, we brought up our children. So we get constantly told that, and I've son and a daughter. I mean, so we get constantly told that, oh, father, he doesn't have a father. And if he's soft, oh, that's why, a child boy needs to man up. He's a soft kid. He's a creative kid. Or for gay men, we have a lot of gay friends, male friends, and they have the other problem.
yeah.
When they have kids, is saying that, oh, can a man bring up kids? So how do you navigate conversations which are sensible and sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
that people have to break away from what we have been brought up,
Mm-hmm.
thinking this is right, this is wrong? So how do you manage in that situation, and what would you advise to people who are watching?
Yeah. Well, I think one, therapy is really important for your own sanity, right? Like when you go through all these kinds of conversations, those of us that have had to unlearn some of these things, and in order to stay on the right track and stay sort of authentic to yourself, I think it's really important to have a therapist. And I know it seems like out of the blue, why am I saying this? But I recently, my father said, right, like in spite of all his like all the stuff that he's learned so far, he still said, well, he's talking about my son, and he says he's a little girlish because he just sits in the corner and reads a book. And I said, wow, I didn't know that was a girlish thing to do. All this intellectual, like maybe Tagore also would sit in a corner and read a book, and he's a great example of an Indian man. So what would so, but it pinched a little, so for that part where it still pinches, like, why would my father say this? And is it true? Or is it like, have I done something wrong? Right? For that, I need to reestablish with a therapist, recalibrate my own lens and my own way of being, right? And then not take that to my son and say, oh, you need to do this or that, or to be appear a little more manly, blah blah blah. I think that really is it. Like, because at the end of the day, and I say this, I said once to my cousins, always be on the side of your children. Don't be on the side of society that says, oh, like what, or don't be like, what will people say? Or, whatever they're saying about your kid. Be on the side of your kid. Tell your kid you live an authentic life. And if they have pressures from, their friends and things like that, I think like that keeping conversations open and having like debriefing with them, as I said before, right? Making fun of the people who are making fun and saying, look how lonely those people are, or how ridiculous is that idea. So recently, for instance, I got some hate mail saying, oh, raise a feminist son, you mean raise a gay son, right? So I had posted that on my social media, and when I tweeted about it, and a former student of mine, a young gay man, said, "We should all be so lucky as to raise gay sons." And I thought that was a perfect response, because there's like a pride in being gay and saying, and yeah, be proud, even if you did raise a gay son. What the hell is wrong with that, right? And so that the younger people, they have a more instinctive response to that, right? And I posted that, and there was such a lot of solidarity in saying like, oh my god, this man is so trapped in his poor, sad little life, that this is how he thinks, right? And so my son, who's not my social media friend, his friend, one of his friends, who's my friend, sent him a snapshot of that, and my son sent an LOL to me, and he said, "Oh my God, this guy! What is, like, poor thing? Like, why is he, And so we're able to laugh it off at this point, and sort of recognize it as almost comical that someone should have that viewpoint. So as we said, like, your kids, my kids, they are finding these ways of dealing with these issues, and let's all work toward a world where we can laugh off some of these barbs.
Interesting, because you spoke about othering earlier, and when we have conversations with my children or our friends, we always talk about this, and we talk about othering, and when we have issues, we are those others. The society is not separate to us. We are part of that society. So when you say they and you point your fingers and both your hands there, it's us,
Yeah, yeah.
So we can change it, and we can only do it. I think you and Sonora, you and us, we've had I think the privilege of bringing up children or a child with these values and these conversations, so that they can be a part of society and rebuild society, right, the way it should be. Now,
Yeah.
on that, you books and movies, right? There are two very important, I think, elements that shape our lives.
Yeah.
You've grown up on Enid Blyton books, like you mentioned, and I've loved her books, and there are a whole lot of things that's going on around her conversation. But books are so important. But when you look at today's narrative, when I read your book in today's time, I love it. I think this is it. From today onwards, my chapter changes, and I will change that society that we're talking about. Hopefully, some 2,000, 20,000, 200,000 people, 2 million people read your book, and their thinking will change. But we also read books as classics, like Enid Blyton's. Now, Enid Blyton book also, apparently, I cannot remember, has had moments where the older person slaps the child,
Mhm.
and they say, how can that have been allowed? But those days, that's what happened, right? So do you think our generation, the next generation, will get confused between the new narrative and the old narrative? Sorry, long question.
Yeah, no, that it's really important. I think if we tell them, oh yeah, this book has certain problems with it because it was written at a certain time, thank goodness things have changed now, right? We've got to add context when we give certain kinds of readings, right? So if I read something, from a long time ago, I mean, I'm thinking, I'll try and think of examples, but I am thinking of a different era, right? I'm thinking of an era where women were not allowed to work. Now, I'm not going to say, oh my God, why would the author think that a woman cannot be a CEO? When we're talking about, say, um, Jane Austen time or whatever, right? Like, we're talking about a certain time where women were expected. And so there's feminist moments in those books for that time, right? So Enid Blyton too, was it the famous five where there's George and Georgina, right? There's a girl called Georgina, or they really identify as George, right? And so there's like a little bit of like, reading that, it was like, what is this about? I suppose George is a tomboy, and today I wouldn't recognize it as very different. Like, George has a different sense of their gender, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's all about the conversations that we have, all about the context, right? Having said that, when we're talking about all the stuff around cancel culture and Enid Blyton, I do think that yes, I did grow up with a certain racist lens, maybe because of the books I was reading, and even though I was enjoying Enid Blyton, and I remember trying to write like her when I was a kid, I was loving those books. I loved them, but I do think it had an impact on me. I do think that we had a certain view. I mean, we are very racist in India. We are racist against Black people, and South Asians have a very anti-Black thing. what is that about? That's about, of course, casteism, but also the books we were reading as young Indian urban English speaking people. We were reading these things where, there's gollywog and, all of this stuff that's where there's racism and all kinds of things going on. So I would not discount that those books had that sort of impact on us. Now, I would not throw those books out, but I would talk about these things. So when we say about, when we talk about cancel culture, we're talking about a consequence culture. We're talking about conversations around certain things. Enid Blyton is not going to get canceled in the way, no one really is getting canceled. So here we said, oh, we've canceled Aziz Ansari, we've canceled Louis C.K. These guys haven't been canceled. There's a third season that Aziz Ansari had to show, and he had a great comeback. And Louis C.K. got a standing ovation when he entered this comedy club in New York City, So people don't really get canceled. Well, Woody Allen is going to jump back as well. They just get sort of contextualized for a little while, or there are conversations around them. So I wouldn't hesitate to have those conversations and to examine, what did an Enid Blyton do to our imagination as young Indian kids, and how, if we're handing those books to our kids these days, we have to provide that context and say, read it, enjoy it, but know that there are all these issues.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How the world is changing, the whole woke culture, everything is right or wrong. And we were watching television last night, and some debate on how people are now very scared, afraid to voice their thoughts, because there's this whole new brigade of people who will troll you, who will not allow you to express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, I think is mostly directed at women, more than men.
Yeah, it is a very complex thing, right? It's very complex, because I do think that in many ways we need that what people are dismissing as woke culture. I think we do need, it's a consequence culture, where finally people who've been shut out, right, from any kind of critical platform, right? They've been shut out from New York Times op-eds. They've been shut out from mainstream media, where you've had like white male people constantly speaking, right? So now when they're beginning to speak up and say, no, this is not okay, examine this, like stop this, etc., we're pushing back on them and saying, no, you don't get to say this, right? So as a feminist, as someone that's LGBTQ, we have to recognize that let's and when I'm saying LGBTQ, I'm not appropriating, I'm saying that for you and for me, I'm not appropriating anyone's struggle or their identity, but I'm saying that, we have to recognize that we are calling out certain things and saying, this is wrong, right? Then we're getting pushback and being called woke and saying, oh, you're just doing this, blah, blah, blah. It's very nuanced, and we have to think of those nuances and say, no, we are not. There are some issues that are very, very knee-jerk, sort of like dismiss this, like out with this, right? But there's a lot of really good conversations coming up from the so-called woke culture that we also cannot dismiss, and I think there's power in that, and that there should be consequences for certain kinds of behavior, and that maybe we'll see what happens with all of this.
I'm looking forward to it, because I'm fascinated by this. It really interests me, because it can get extreme, as it does in any conversation. But I think people like us are beginning these narratives and these conversations, and dialogues are important, right? And that is why writers are important. People like you are important, and I loved your book. And I have a last question for you, because we're just about running out of time. And so, what was the purpose of this book? I just want to know, when you wrote it, did you write it for yourself, or did you write thinking that I'm going to actually make a difference? Because you are making a difference.
Thank you, Raga. Thanks for saying that. I think it started with self-expression, right? Like I wanted to write about certain things in my life, and then it gets this framework of a purpose, right? And saying, look, I did this, it's possible. And also like shocking a few people, saying, feminist son, what is that? Like, some men have told me it's a little bit jarring, and I said, oh, good. So, sort of like pushing the envelope a little bit, and definitely self-expression. It is like, I want to tell this story, I want to speak about this, I want to tell you about things that happened in my life, and also that a new world is possible. So let's all come along, let's go.
I hope I meet you in person one day and I meet your son as well. And I'd love for our twins to meet your boy because it sounds like a new world has been started.
Same
Uh,
here, and I feel that about your family. Your family sounds so lovely, and I've seen pictures, and I look forward to meeting you all.
Thank you. Looking forward to that as well. And with this, we hope our audience have enjoyed the interaction. If you want to write to us, any thoughts, feedback, please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. Sonora, your social media handles, please, if you
Yeah,
can share.
Prof. Sonora Jha on Twitter, and Sonora Jha on Facebook, and Sonora Jha 1 on Instagram.
One as in number one.
Number 1, yeah.
See, she's number one. Remember that. I love that. And thank you for joining in. Please remember to follow me on Totally Out Now on FB, Insta, and Twitter for such conversations. And Nicola, thank you for helping us with the back end. As always, signing out at Totally Out Now. You're watching today, presented by the Views Room. Thank you, Sonora. So lovely.
Thank you.